What is going on, fight fans? So today we're going to basically do the pay-per-view buys using all of the data in terms of the engagement leading up to the fight, the post-fight stuff, engagement, hashtag usage, volume, and even how much of the hashtag was being used the night before, or the night of, of the fight. So all of this is going to give us a good indicator of what the pay-per-view numbers were for Terence Crawford versus Madrimov. Now, because I was in Kansas City and now I'm here and I want to get this video out already, I'm gonna kind of quickly talk about everything else and then jump right into the pay-per-view numbers. So first things first, it was a really good card, but I am realizing that super stacked cards do create fan fatigue, right? Like viewer fatigue, because you're still kind of there for the Crawford Madrimov fight, and you're getting all these amazing fights, and individually they would be perfect. If you get Andy Ruiz versus Big Baby Miller on a standalone card, fire, right? Even though I do believe that Miller got, robbed in that fight. In my opinion, he should have won, but they made it a draw. Again, Anderson versus Bacoli, that all of that stuff could have been the headliner. But as you're watching these fights, there's so many of them. Plus, there's a performance. There's such a fatigue that happens, right? I think the sweet spot is kind of the way Showtime does it, or not Showtime anymore. I guess Amazon Prime is still the same production team, you can tell, but the way Amazon Prime does it, you get like 2 fights, then the main event. I think that's really good. A really solid undercard, I think is all you need. I think it's too much fan fatigue when there's like 7 fights and they all matter, and like it's too much fan fatigue. So just a super solid undercard and maybe 2 or 3 fights before the main event, and then you're good to go. No performances, unfortunately. I think it extends the card too long, and it makes it very difficult for people to watch, in my opinion, especially if you're trying to bring in a casual audience. You think a casual audience is going to sit through 7 fights of people that, although it was super cool, the list was super cool, to them, they don't really care. They're here to see Crawford Madrimov. So the faster we can get to that, the more entertaining and more like pace, the more snappy the pacing will feel. Anyways, that's my point on that. All those fights were good. I do want to talk about 2 fights in particular more than anything. The Pitbull Cruz versus Rayo fight. Now, if you remember, I said, this is so funny. It wasn't necessarily a prediction, but I said that the best case scenario is that they're in a close fight and Rayo gets the nod. And they ended up being in a close fight and Rayo got the nod. Now, why do I say that this is the best case scenario? Because they were trying to sell us a Pitbull Cruz Part 2 with Tank. And that was a horrible fight. I needed Rayo to show that fight wasn't good, because I did not want to see Pitbull against Tank again. Like it's a waste of time. Just because he didn't get a knockout, in my opinion, it was a waste of time. So what we did get that made sense was Rayo beating Cruz, and now like if Tank fights Cruz, that doesn't make any sense. So he would have to fight Rayo, and he would have to move up to 140. Now, is he going to move up to 140 and fight Rayo for the belts? Is he going to force Rayo to come down to 135 because, he's the head honcho, right? He's the A side. So is he going to force him to come down? Or is he just going to completely buck Rayo and Pitbull and then finally fight Shakur Stevenson? That's also a possibility, right? Because Shakur Stevenson doesn't necessarily have a dance partner, but in terms of the talks that was happening while Shakur Stevenson was there, at the LA fight, he said that it looked like a Zepeda fight was being set up with him, and now Golden Boy and Top Rank are both with Riyadh Season. Maybe, more than likely, that can be the next fight to be made. Shakur Stevenson versus William Zepeda. I think Ryo looks super sharp and clean. It really does do, like, I get it. Some fans only like the triangle theory when it works for them, and they hate the triangle theory when it doesn't work for them. That's how people are, right? Like, oh, you can't, man. You know that A plus B don't always equal C or whatever. But then when they want to make the resumes look good, they be like, yo, that's the guy that beat the other guy that beat that guy. So what you talking about? He a good fighter. I kept telling people that Pitbull was not a better fighter than Oscar Valdez. I kept saying it because people have to understand that Shakur Stevenson fights people at the top of the rankings, right? Just because you don't know the names of the fighters doesn't mean that they're not actually really good. They just don't have good marketing. They just don't have enough marketing for it to reach you and for you to have them as a notable fighter. But that doesn't mean that they're not good, right? So I kept telling people Oscar Valdez is better than a Pitbull Cruz, and everybody's like, heck no, man, Pitbull Cruz could probably beat everybody and their mamas if they put it. No. When we saw Pitbull Cruz versus Ryo, who, by the way, was beat up and knocked out by Edwin De Los Santos, who, by the way, lost to Shakur Stevenson. But it's a triangle theory that goes against Tank fans, so therefore triangle theories is not a thing anymore, right? Until one day, now Tank fans think that Tank is better than Haney because Tank beat Ryan, and Ryan tentatively had beaten Haney until he didn't. But because of that performance, they think that he's better than Haney. But they do not think that Shakur is better than Tank, even though Pitbull gave Tank problems in a close fight, and Ryo beat him, and Ryo lost to De Los Santos, but De Los Santos lost to Shakur. They don't care about that. Triangle theory don't matter no more, right? Triangle theory don't matter no more because that's their guy, right? So that's how it is. That's how it is in boxing. Super fandoms. Okay, so I thought that was fire. And then now Terence Crawford versus Madrimov. A lot of people are saying that now Terence Crawford is not ready for a Canelo Alvarez fight because of his performance. Terence Crawford moved up to 154, and Terence Crawford fought the world champion at 154 and also became the interim champion. He WBA champion and WBO interim champion, and he could fight Sebastian Fundora, and that will give him 2 titles. So he'll be just 1 title away. So essentially, in 2 more fights, he could become undisputed at 154. The man didn't come up and do a tune-up. He went right for the world champion at 154. Now, that's tough to do, right? Because remember, again, guys, it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how much you know the guy. Just because you don't know the guy doesn't mean the guy is not really, really good. And if they're fighting at the top of the rankings, meaning they're winning world titles and they're doing all these things and they're going through the ranking system and climbing the ranking system by beating other people who are at the top of the rankings, they are good fighters. I told you guys that Madrimov is good in my last video. Like, hey, think of him like Lomachenko. Lomachenko beat an undefeated Gary Russell Jr. with only 2 fights under his belt because he was a decorated amateur. Madrimov is a decorated amateur. They're already ready to go. They know how to do this. Same thing with Usyk. Usyk doesn't even have nearly the amount of fights of everybody else, but he's a decorated amateur, right? He's a gold medalist. So he's able to get in there and do work with 1 fight. You know what I'm saying? With 2 fights, right? That's why he hyper sped his whole career. That's what I was telling you guys in the last video about Madrimov. Now, because y'all didn't hear about him, now y'all think that Terence Crawford is trash, right? But the thing is, Terence Crawford went to 154 for the first time and fought a world champion who is a decorated amateur who we got to see how far he takes this, right? Because this fight could age like wine for Terence Crawford because even Lomachenko, right? Even Lomachenko went on to become like Lomachenko, right? Even after winning the world title against Gary Russell Jr. in just his third fight. So it's insane. These guys that are decorated amateurs, they're really good. They're very, very good. As long as they're calm and composed, they're good. And Madrimov was calm and composed. He was throwing off-rhythm punches. He had a herky-jerky style that's very hard to read. He would change levels instantaneously. And then he was also very, very calm and patient, where he didn't just, take off because it was too much time being spent. He was going to wait and wait and wait and wait and never really gave Terence Crawford something to bite on, right? But that doesn't mean that, to me, Terence Crawford outboxed him clearly, right? Because he had great punch selection and great combinations. Now, one thing I will disagree with Shakur Stevenson on, because I see him on Twitter saying that it wasn't a close fight at all. Now, tactically and mentally, I could see what he's saying in terms of Terence Crawford tactically was beating him the most, right? With the mind games, with getting to the places first, with getting him to fall into his traps more. However, in terms of judging the fight, Madrimov did enough to make it a tough fight for Terence Crawford. So I don't agree with Shakur Stevenson on the fact that it was not a close fight. It was a close fight, but I definitely do not agree with anybody who thinks that Terence Crawford lost that fight. I think he won that fight. Now, because it's a close fight, you could go either way, to be honest, but I do have Terence Crawford winning that fight. He pretty much edged him out in most of the rounds. He was getting caught with big shots, but he was landing more shots than Madrimov was. Now, let's get to the pay-per-view numbers, right? Pay-per-view numbers, this is what matters. Oh, and also, what do I think he should fight Canelo Alvarez? I think if he wants to fight Canelo Alvarez, he can, but I do think that he has a lot of options. And I really want to see Canelo versus Benavidez. That's still the number one thing that I want to see Canelo do. So, let's see what happens there. Pay-per-view numbers. Here we go. So compiling all of the numbers, all of the different things, and everything together, as I mentioned, with the hashtags, volume of hashtags being used for that Madrimov Terence Crawford or Crawford Madrimov hashtag on Twitter. Also, the engagement of that and the engagement of pre-fight stuff. I have this pay-per-view doing roughly around 100,000 pay-per-view buys to about 175,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, this one wasn't easy to do, so there might be some wiggle room to go a little bit above or even a little bit below, because there were a lot of the pre-fight stuff was also put on ESPN as well as the DAZN YouTube channels. So yes, we're extrapolating those numbers, but it could get a little bit messy because your viewership was kind of split. But even with that, taking that into account, and of course taking into account piracy, which is very, very heavy, I have that pay-per-view doing around 100,000, maybe even going from 85,000 pay-per-view buys all the way up to 175,000 pay-per-view buys. So 85,000 to 175,000, I would say, is probably the more safer number. But again, there could be some wiggle room going a little bit higher, and even after the 85,000, a little bit going lower. But that's where I have the pay-per-view buys for Terence Crawford versus Madrimov based off of the pay-per-view post or the pay-per-view post engagement numbers. Now, remember, I've been correct on all of the predictions so far in terms of pay-per-view buys. We predicted, you know, all Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence. We predicted that correctly. Tank versus Brian Garcia. We predicted that correctly. Canelo Alvarez. We predicted it correctly. Tank versus Frank Martin. The recent one, we predicted that correctly. So we do predict our pay-per-view numbers correctly, and that is where I have the pay-per-view numbers for Terence Crawford versus Madrimov. Does that make Terence Crawford a star or not? I don't know. I think he needs a dance partner. I think a dance partner is probably the best thing that he could do. Then we can see how much Terence Crawford can sell. A dance partner where he's more known than that dance partner. I think that's something that's going to be very telling. Anyways, let's go ahead and end the video there. Let me know down in the comment section below. Do you guys think that it did around 85,000 to around 175,000 pay-per-views, or do you think it did dramatically more or dramatically less? Let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.